In this week's episode, I wanted to do something slightly different. I want to break down a specific element of writing my music. I'm talking about writing your drums. Now, when it comes to lo-fi or boom bap, chill hop, sleepy beats, whatever you want to call it, drums are an important part of the process, an important part of the music. However, I think there is one very important drum pattern, one very important drum loop. Once you learn this drum loop, it'll mean that you can make pretty much any of those genres of music, and with just a few tweaks, you can make it suitable for whatever type of music you're trying to make within the lo-fi umbrella. Let's get into it. I've got here a completely empty FL Studio rack. I've got absolutely nothing loaded into my channel rack. I've got nothing in the playlist. I've got no instruments loaded, nothing. And I'm just gonna have a real quick talk about a really basic drum pattern that will help you with making your lo-fi beats. So I'm just going to load in a couple of sounds here. Let's just grab a couple of really nice drum sounds and we'll get into it. I'm just going to stick all of these on my mixer also. Okay, so I've loaded in here a kick, a snare, and a hat sound. Just 3 sounds, and I'm keeping this really simple. Now, this is a beat that you probably hear across most lo-fi tracks in some capacity. So the general idea here is to put a kick on the 1, and then you put a snare on the 2, and the 4, and then you can add a kick somewhere around here also to give you a little bit of that kind of jazzy swing. I think the most common places are to stick it either here halfway between the 3 and the 4, or here before that snare hits. So you'll get something like this, or something like this. And this is a really commonly used drum pattern in a lot of lo-fi beats, whether that's sleepy or chill hop, dream hop, your general lo-fi stuff that you hear on like Lo-Fi Girl. This kind of swing drum pattern was really prominent in the general upcoming sound of lo-fi. And it's something that you still hear today. It's something that I still use. Just this general pattern can be really, really effective. If I just chuck in a couple of hi-hats, that's it. It's super simple. You can obviously extend this. You can add some more kind of cadence to it. You can add a little bit more swing. So some people like to add, say, another kick here, or you could add one after. And they're just really simply by chucking in a couple of extra kicks, specifically kicks, you can get a much more interesting and evolved pattern. Super simple and just really, really effective. That is the most basic, simple drum pattern that you'll hear across lo-fi, across the board. I'm not saying it's the only drum pattern, but I think if you're just getting started, if you're a beginner in the scene, this drum pattern here is lo-fi drums 101. There's obviously more that you can do. You can start layering your snares, you can start layering your kicks, you can even layer multiple hats, and there's definitely songs out there that have a different drum pattern. So this is absolutely not the only one that you'll ever need. Just a really good starting point if you're not sure about how to build your drums in a lo-fi track. Generally, lo-fi drums are fairly simple. You don't want to be doing too much, especially not with the kick. I mean, if I start adding a bunch more kicks in, let's say we start putting some doubles in, we start adding some extras in there and there, you'll hear it very quickly becomes overwhelming. And it's just not got that lo-fi feeling to it anymore. And then if you want to elevate this even further, a couple of extra things you can do. You can add some swing to your hi-hats. The best way to do this is just to unquantize them ever so slightly. You could take them all, drag them slightly off beat, take half of them, drag half of them off beat. That's just a really effective way to give you much more of that classic swing sound. And if you're a fan of El Dre, this is something that he does with his hi-hats a lot. I know he plays his in usually, but just adding that kind of extra swing gives you a really nice vibe and a really nice feeling to those hats. You can layer extra hats in. So let's chuck another hat in here and let's get that to play every 4 steps. just a really nice layer. And then you could do the same with your snares. And just like that, you have a more evolved, a more interesting pattern. So you don't feel like you just have to use your kick, your snare, and your hat. You can layer them out, you can add rides, you can add crashes, you can add loads more stuff to make this a more interesting beat. But I wanted to make this video just to talk about the basic Lo-Fi 101 drum pattern that I think all lo-fi producers need to know. Now I'm going to have a look at some cases where I've used this in my beats, and then we will look at how I've edited from that basic pattern. So let's load up one of my recent beats. So here's a beat that I was working on recently, and let's go and have a look at the drums. Immediately you can see here I've got a kick, I've got 2 snares, and then I've got 2 hat sounds. Let's take a listen. So you can hear I'm still sticking to that basic core pattern. That's the kick on the 1, the snare on the 2 and the 4, and then that kick coming in just before. At its most basic point, this is how the beat would have started. And then you can see I added in a couple more kicks, double layered snare and a double layered hat. And I actually have added in a couple of little drum fills using the sound as well. So just before the drums come in, you get this nice little hit. This is a more kind of ambient but chill hop style guitar driven track. So let's just have a listen to sort of these last few bars and then how the drums properly come in. So that's how you'd use it in sort of a guitar driven, maybe chill hop style track. So let's have a look maybe at something a little bit sleepier. This is another track they've been working on here. More of a slowed down, sleepy, kind of washed out beat, but let's take a listen to how the drums sound. We're still sticking to our core pattern, kick, then the snare, then I move the kick over 1 so it comes in a little earlier this time. And then I've actually gone a long section here without a kick. We've left loads of space. Also added in some extra hats. So rather than just hitting on the 2, we've got like a nice little triplet here. It's obviously a slow track, so it's not hitting in that kind of trap style triplet, but it just has 1, 2, 3, like a nice little swing from that triplet. I've also played with the velocities there to add a nice little bit of movement and swing. So if we take a listen to how that works out in the whole track. Super nice, super nice. So just sitting as more of a background percussive element in that track. So let's see if we can find another track here. Okay, so I just loaded up another track here just as another example of why this drum pattern is so effective. So I've got here another track where I've layered 2 snares and 2 hats. We've got some nice layering going on there, but really if we look at it, what we've got going on here is exactly that same core pattern. We've got a couple of extra kick hits here, so we've got a double hit there, and then here we've got like a little bit busier section with a couple of kicks, but hopefully not too much in the context of the track. So let's listen to how this drum loop sounds. And then I layered in an extra snare and an extra hat. Again, super simple, but just works perfectly in pretty much any setting within lo-fi. So there you go. I mean, it is really just core drum pattern that you're going to hear across the board in so many lo-fi tracks, and with different intonations. Like some people use a rim shot instead of a snare, some people use a perk instead of a snare. You can do this without the hi-hat, like without a hi-hat entirely. You know, you can do this with a more complex snare pattern. You can add extra snares in. I just think the core element of this drum pattern is so versatile across the lo-fi genre as a whole. So I want to have a little talk now about sound selection and what I look for when I build a drum kit like this. What am I looking for? Now, generally, I'm looking for a kick that has a kind of subby, bassy frequency. It doesn't tail too long, and it doesn't have any kind of extra high-end frequencies. I just want something kind of subby to add some warmth to the track. So I have a kick in this track that sounds like this. So it's just that like really nice low end, quite short, and it's quite punchy. You know, you could pull something that's a bit more dusty, like this one here I've got from Prithvi, and they've got a bit more of that high end. That's just not what I look for in my tracks. I think something like this really suits my style a little bit more. So that's something I always look for in my kicks. With snares, I like to find them kind of short, punchy sounds. Just a nice kind of like perk sound, that one. And then I've got another snare here with a little bit of high end, and that would have been why I layered those together. You've got one that sits really in kind of the middle frequency, nice short, punchy sound, and this one has a bit more of a tail and is in a higher frequency. With hats, I tend to look for two things. I'll look for something that's like short and sharp with kind of a nice crisp high end, because there isn't many sounds in my tracks that have that high end. So the hat is something that really adds the high end to the track. So I'll look for something kind of like this. But I'll also sometimes look for something that has a more subtle kind of shaker sound. And that's something that I'll layer in more so than the other sound. So in this track, for example, I've got that second hi-hat that's playing on every beat. And then you've got that high end that comes in with the other hat. Then same with the snares. We've got that short punchy snare. And then the high end tail snare. Layering to give you just a bit more of an interesting dynamic, just that nice like low end from the kick with a nice punchy, like I don't know how to describe it, like boomy, nice, yeah, like boomy bass. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to talk about what I think is a really core element in lo-fi, and this drum pattern, you'll hear it absolutely everywhere. You've also got to try and think about how you're going to make it your own, instead of just like copying this exact drum pattern or just using the most basic drum pattern. Don't feel like you have to make it too complicated. Keeping it simple is usually better. You're just making a nice chilled out beat, and you kind of just want to like make people nod their heads as the beat's going on. I think that's the vibe you want to hope for. I think that's pretty much it. Peace.